Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the list of 18 great instrumental soloists who became conductors, and very good ones at that, too. That's what really matters, you know? It's not just that they played, but that they conducted really, really, really well. And there are quite a few of them. Of course, it's not an uncommon thing. Most conductors are also instrumentalists, usually pianists or violinists. But these were people who really had careers as concert artists before they turned to conducting. That's the difference. It's a subtle difference, but it's a difference. And it also gives me an opportunity to toss together another list full of bazillions of names of people you may or may not have heard of. And so, you can spend some more time. Remember, this all began with the top 20 conductors, and now we've done like the top 100 and something 20 conductors. So it's continuing. Actually, it does have to come to an end in a few videos, I think. I don't know how many more we'll do, but the bottom line is there are so many out there. There really are. We don't think about it as much as we do composers and works. Everyone says, well, there's 200 recordings of Beethoven's Fifth out there. It's insane. Well, it is insane. But there are tons and tons of artists. And one of the reasons that classical music recordings proliferated in such an absurd manner is that the world's conservatories, the performing arts, military, industrial complex keeps churning out musicians, and they need work. I mean, they got to do things, and some of them are very, very gifted. And as a result of that, and as labels burgeoned and artists burgeoned and recordings burgeoned, everything's burgeoning. We have burgeonitis, and that's really the issue. Doing this series has been interesting, and one of the reasons I've kept it going as long as I have, which is kind of ridiculous. Starting with the top 20 and then going on to the best 200 or 300 or so, is because it's driven home to me, looking through my modest CD collection here, the fact that there are just so many good artists. I mean, I did a whole talk about this, about drowning in greatness. Great recordings aren't rare. Great performances aren't rare. Great artists aren't rare. They aren't. The only reason we get to this limited number is by ignoring everybody else. It really is. It's just a delusion. There's just tons and tons and tons of good stuff. So here we have 18 more. Get ready, folks. Let's start at the top. Vladimir Ashkenazy. A lot of you have mentioned him. Decca's been doing Ashkenazy boxes of every possible configuration of his except his conducting. Now, he was not as good a conductor as he was a pianist, and it took him a while to learn his craft. He started doing the Russian stuff he knew well, and then he branched out and did things like Richard Strauss and Sibelius and all that with varying degrees of success. But he's a very fine musician. So a lot of his recordings are also very, very good. And I have to give him some credit. He hasn't gone crazy into things that really were not his Fach, let's put it that way. I mean, remember, he did a few Beethoven symphonies, and that didn't work out terribly well. So he didn't do that many more. He's been pretty shrewd, I think. I don't know whether it was his record company that was shrewd or he that was shrewd, but there's some shrewdness there. And he has made beautiful recordings of, Tchaikovsky. I mean, his Pathetique Symphony, his Manfred Symphony is one of the best. And some good Sibelius, not a lot. I mean, some of it was very iffy, but some of it was quite good. And his Richard Strauss tone poems in Cleveland were good. And he's conducted from the piano, and it all depends. It all depends on what the repertoire was. But he is a serious artist and a serious conductor. I saw him do a wonderful Sibelius Fifth at Carnegie Hall, so he's there. He can do it. Another wonderful conductor / musician generally is Heinrich Schiff, who of course was one of the great cellists, and then took up conducting later. And I did a review. You've seen the video. I'm sure you've all seen the video of the Heinrich Schiff, commemorative box that has a lot of his work as a conductor as well as his playing as a cellist. Always amazingly musical and sensible and interesting. He was a wonderful guy. He really was wonderful. I met him a few times. He used to hang out at Tower Records, Lincoln Center, whenever he was in town, and he was as sociable and pleasant as anybody you've ever met, and fun to talk to, and just really a terrific musician and a terrific person. So Heinrich Schiff definitely deserves to be on the list. Daniel Barenboim, remember him? Well, there seems to be some question as to whether he's a pianist who became a conductor or a conductor who was also a pianist. However you slice it, he was an extremely versatile and talented musician. He really is. He's also like 3 feet tall. He's like a little elf. I mean, just, the pictures belie the reality. But the truth of the matter is that he was spread a little bit thin, I think, in his professional career. Every time he had like a few extra minutes, he'd toss off another Beethoven sonata cycle. He focused on the German standard repertoire, Beethoven, Mozart, those people, and Wagner, who was not into piano stuff. He was a fabulous Wagner conductor, really a sensational Wagner conductor, maybe the greatest Wagner conductor of the 20th century, all around. He didn't always get the best soloist, but his conducting was amazing. That box of Wagner operas on Warner is tremendous, and everyone should hear it if you care about really great Wagner conducting. His piano playing could vary. I mean, like, as we all know, he did the Beethoven Concerti with Klemper, or Mozart Concerti with himself, and the English Chamber Orchestra conducting for the piano, which is always a mistake, I think. And like I said, zillions of Beethoven, sonata cycles and things. He was selective in what he played at the keyboard, but that he was really gifted at all things, well, there's not much question about that. So he belongs on the list. Another one who really belongs on the list is Trevor Pinnock. Trevor Pinnock may very well be the best of the period instrument conductor folks who came out of that English early music mafia. He was much more interesting than Christopher Hogwood. I think he was more musical and less rigid and dictatorial than John Eliot Gardner, and even more compelling. And then there was like Roy Goodman, and there were a bunch of other ones who really weren't that important. But Pinnock was a major musician. He really was. I mean, he really is. He still is. And he was also a tremendous keyboard artist. Remember, he made one of the iconic recordings of the Goldberg variations for archive as a harpsichordist. So the guy's got it. He's got everything, the chops. He can play, he can conduct, he can do all of that stuff. And he does it extraordinarily well. So does Pinchas Zukerman. Haven't heard much from him lately, have we? He began life as a violinist, and he used to be grouped with the Stern, Perlman, Zukerman, La Kosher Nostra, as they were called in the business, the Israeli/Jewish violinist crew. And they were all sort of considered one giant blob, but they differentiated themselves in many ways. And Zukerman did it by going into conducting with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. He made a few recordings, but he was a very, very good conductor, and another extremely talented musician who does not deserve to be forgotten. Someone more along the lines of Pinnock in the early music world was Ton Koopman, a fabulous keyboard performer, as a pupil of Gustav Leonhardt, whose austerity was such as to terrify all of us. He's on this list too. We'll get to him in a minute. But just in case you were wondering, Koopman, of course, did all the Bach cantatas, and he got as far as Haydn's Paris symphonies, which I think he did dreadfully. Like his mentor, he tended to emphasize a certain gaunt austerity in the period instrument movement. A stripped down, small scale. I never much enjoyed his work, I have to confess, but I respected it because, the musicality behind it and his own talents were never in question. So he could play, he could conduct, he did lots of that Baroque choral stuff, and so there you go. Then let's change, get away from the early music people for a bit. Alexander Schneider, Sasha Schneider, as he was also known. He was the second violinist, or was originally in the Budapest String Quartet, but he had a huge career doing everything. I mean, he was a very gregarious guy, and he just loved music, and he founded music festivals and free music programs and all kinds of stuff, and showed up as conductor of the Columbia Symphony Orchestra doing Mozart piano concertos with Rudolf Serkin and, other people, the Marlborough crowd. Really a fabulous all-around musician, and someone whose name doesn't come up that much anymore, at least, as much as it used to. But in the musical world of the 1950s, after he and the quartet fled Germany, when the Nazis came to power and they wound up in the United States, they were on tour, actually, in the United States when war broke out, and they took U.S. citizenship and stayed here, and he was a real force to be reckoned with, and another one of those all-round musicians who could do just about anything and do it well. I mean, really, really well. I mean, of course, he didn't conduct like Stockhausen, but in the repertoire, which was the quartet repertoire, he could play it with a quartet, or as a solo violinist. He recorded the Bach sonatas and partitas in the late 1940s for Mercury, or he could conduct with his colleagues, and he did it with wonderful collegial affability. So he belongs on the list for sure. Well, let's get away from the violinists and the pianists. That's what all these people are, keyboardists and violinists and things. Christian Lindberg. Now, there you go. He's a trombonist. How many trombonists become great conductors? Well, a few of them have. Holst was a trombonist. So, yes, it happens. It actually happens. There's a whole bunch of bassoonists like Nathalie Stutzmann and some others. But no, Christian Lindberg was a trombonist. And of course, the solo repertoire for trombone is much larger than you think it is. Trust me on that one. And he recorded a lot of it for Bis, but it's also full of horrible contemporary music that nobody wants to hear terribly much. So you're better off becoming a conductor of horrible contemporary music that nobody wants to hear. And in fact, Lindberg specialized in doing Alan Pedersen. He is the linchpin of the Bis Alan Pedersen complete works, which he does superbly well. He's a wonderful musician in contemporary music because he conducts with clarity and virtuosity, and the music holds no terrors for him, which is really only to be expected of somebody who, can play the Flight of the Bumblebee on a trombone. So there you go. Let's stick with brass players for a minute. After Christian Lindberg, Gerard Schwarz, an amazing trumpeter. I mean, first-class trumpeter, who became a first-class conductor. He was also on the list of conductors who deserve major symphony orchestras because, American orchestras for some reason don't like American conductors, which is just horrible, except for David Robertson in St. Louis. Good for them, guys. He's not on this list. Well, he could be, I suppose. But in any case, Schwarz was or is a first-class conductor. He's made scads of superb recordings, and he's played the trumpet. He's played the trumpet on some and conducted on others, and good for him. He's getting up there in years now, but who cares? I mean, he's a fabulous musician that deserves all the attention we can lavish on him, and so lavish we will. Pablo Casals. Can't leave him off, can we? One of the iconic, some people think the greatest cellist that ever lived. I don't think technically he was, but musically, he was another one of those all-around music guys. He had to go into conducting because he couldn't just limit himself to the cello repertoire. He was also a composer. Remember his oratorio, El Pesebre, the manger, and some other things. He didn't compose a lot, but he could. I mean, the point is there wasn't anything musical that he couldn't do, and he was a wonderful conductor. Oh my goodness, his Mozart symphonies and Beethoven symphonies and the things he did with the Marlborough Festival Orchestra are just wonderful. And we badly need a Pablo Casals as conductor box. We do. He limited himself mostly to Baroque and classical repertoire, but gosh, he was good. He was sort of like Sandor Vegh. Is he on this list? Oh, he's coming up too. One of those guys who just dripped music and whose warmth and humanity and singing qualities, I mean, they all came out in his conducting. Not so much in his cello playing. Well, his earlier cello playing. Later, he got a little dry and leathery in his tone. But wow, what a great musician. And then, speaking of bassoonist, Nathalie Stutzmann, of course. She was everything. She was a bassoonist. She was a tremendous singer, a contralto of real insight and musical gifts. And she's become a conductor, and she has the Atlanta Symphony. And like some of you have said, well, she hasn't done very much yet as a conductor. Beethoven Concerto Cycle, Dvorak's New World Symphony. Yes, that's true. She's just getting started. But she's... I mean, there's nothing to complain about what she's done lately. And given her history as a soloist in various formats, I think we are justified in giving her a little bit of, advance notice. Let's call it that. I hope to hear more of her work. I really do, because I think she's been terrific so far. And I'm curious to hear what comes. Yehudi Menuhin. Remember him? Yehudi Menuhin. Oh, we gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Cannes Classical Awards, and he was unfortunately towards the end of his life. He really was. He was very pleasant. I mean, he was very, very pleasant. But sometimes when these artists really get up there in years, I think that they're exploited. They're exploited by their coterie, the people that hang on to them, their management and other people. I saw that very graphically with Montserrat Caballé, too. She just had traveled with this troupe of people who insulate them from the real world and just trot them out to receive awards and do things. And they all, of course, get to travel with them, and they get like free snacks. And, there's an industry and it surrounds them. And this entourage that they have is very, very protective of them, because they are the bread and butter of the whole entourage, but also very grasping and somewhat unpleasant. Menuhin sort of had one of those entourage, and I don't like entourages. I never liked them. I just find most of the time that they're rather mercenary and kind of parasitical. That's the word, isn't it? So, but Menuhin was there, and he became a conductor and conducted Elgar symphonies, and he conducted a lot of Elgar and English string music. Vaughan Williams, did he do some of too? I think he did for Virgin Classics and whatnot. He was never a great conductor. He really wasn't. He wasn't a bad one either. You could also argue that he was never a great violinist. He was certain things and at certain times. Let's put it that way. He had issues. He had issues with his bowing arm and things, and throughout his life, and he was spread way too thin. He never met a charitable foundation he wouldn't be the president of. He was more into world peace and things like that than he was into music, and I mean that's fine. That was his gig, and he certainly deserved his Lifetime Achievement Award. But his conducting was respectable. Sometimes it was just awful, but most of the time, at least under studio conditions, it was pretty respectable. And it was serious, because he did it a lot. He was not just a part-time conductor type. I mean, he did major works and spent a lot of time in front of the orchestra. There's Gustav Leonhardt, hanging out under Yehudi Menuhin. Okay. Leonhardt was, of course, an amazing keyboard artist, and he was the second half of the Teldec Bach Complete Cantatas, pairing up with Nicholas Harnoncourt. And they made a wonderful yin and yang sort of pair, because Harnoncourt was all over the place, as Harnoncourt tended to be, and Leonhardt was always sober, and he was a good Bach cantata guy, because he was kind of grim and sober and like I said, very austere. He thought, all music after the Baroque was superficial and worthless, and he couldn't stand anything. He would have spent the rest of his life, if he could, playing chopsticks on a virginal or something like that. That was kind of his thing, and he was known as a very, very impressive, gifted, and intolerant, in some respects, teacher of that whole school of period instrument performance coming out of the Netherlands, Ton Koopman and his brothers and people like that, and they all worked together. Franz Bruggen, they were another, the Treif Nostra, the non-kosher Nostra, if you want to call them that, but he was a genuine all-around musician. Of course, we do have to remember that when it comes to period instrument stuff, generally speaking, There were no such things as conductors. So, they weren't out there, those people, the Pinnocks and the, Leonhardts, and, they weren't out there doing Mahler cycles. Harnoncourt, who was a cellist, by the way, originally, and became a conductor. He's not on this list because he's on other lists. But he was a real conductor of everything. Just about everything. But Leonhardt stuck to his Fach. And so as a conductor, it was more like he led from the keyboard and he did, Baroque choral music and whatnot as a specialty. But he was no less important as a director of musical things going on, whether he was at the keyboard or conducting. And boy, he made some great recordings like C.P. Bach's D minor concerto and the Bach D minor concerto, that disc. Oh my God, it's amazing. Major force in the period instrument movement. There's also Christoph Eschenbach. People tend not to remember him too much either. He had a really nice second career as a conductor on the Ondine label. He did Roussel symphonies and all kinds of things, As a conductor and as a pianist, he was, in the late Romantic subjective vein. He teamed up with Johnny Smith, also known as Simon Bartow, and did, concerto performances all over the place. I saw them do the Rachmaninoff Third Concerto at Ravinia. I think was the last time I saw them together. Eschenbach is an odd duck. His playing is somewhat push-me-pull-you, romantic, improvisational, very free, heavy, self-indulgent, maybe is the word. And so is his conducting. He made some exciting Mahler recordings in Philadelphia that are really romantically out there. People think that, I'd like to talk about Bernstein being, very emotionally indulgent and all that stuff. People who don't know anything about Bernstein and haven't heard the range of his work, and they're full of crap. Eschenbach made Bernstein look like Gustav Leonhardt when it came to Mahler and things like that. He was all over the place as a conductor, but he did both. And he had a very successful career. Sandor Vegh, who we mentioned already. Oh, he was just one of the great musicians of the 20th century. Just an incredible conductor. Spent his entire career essentially conducting the Camerata Academica Mozartia Salzburgia, whatever that thing was called. There are wonderful live recordings on the Orfeo label. He recorded all the Mozart serenades for Capriccio and one on Phillips, and some other Mozart symphonies and other things. Boy, was he a Mozart guy. And Haydn, the classical repertoire, Schubert, he was incomparable. He really was. And he was the first violinist of the Vegh Quartet, which made one of the most intense and spiritually transcendent, everyone says, recordings of the Beethoven string quartets, particularly the late ones. The guy had a warmth and humanity and again, that singing quality that Hungarian conductors seem to be able to cultivate. At least most, there are always exceptions. There was always Schulte, right? But no, he was tremendous. Just a tremendous musician and did amazing work. Wolfgang Sawallisch. Yeah, we shouldn't forget him. His conducting legacy is huge. Some of it's rather boring, some of it's very distinguished, but he was a terrific accompaniment pianist. He didn't really have much of a solo career as a pianist, but he accompanied Lieder and singing. He was an all-around opera guy in the great German tradition of people who grew up as rehearsal pianists in opera houses and then worked their way into the orchestra. He was never the most dynamic conductorial voice. Some of his stuff is fairly ordinary or workmanlike, but he was a very, very considerate and talented opera conductor and Lieder accompanist at the piano. And so he certainly deserves mention because there's a very, very large discography, and a lot of it's really distinguished. People don't pay attention to, when you're evaluating careers, you look at, well, how was this Gerard Lieder? How was this Mahler? How was this, the big things, the big noisy things. Although Sawallisch did wonderful, Bruckner, he really did. But, you tend to only look at larger, noisier things, not so much smaller, more intimate things, chamber music and Lieder and things like that. But they're just as important. The music is just as great. It requires just as much, if not more, artistry, and you're even more exposed as a soloist. And his discography in that area is really, really impressive. And so he deserves a serious shout out as a result. Only two more to go. Joseph Swensen. Joseph Swensen, I wonder what he's doing now. I have no idea. He is a first-class musician. He recorded with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra for Lynn, a good little chunk of the Romantic violin concerto repertoire. He's a first-class violinist, and they're wonderful performances. His Brahms violin concerto was like amazing, and he's like conducting from the violin, which is impressive because, like I said, it's never a good idea when the soloist, especially in romantic music in the orchestra, are taking two roles. You really need to have independent personalities meshing in great concerto recordings, but he meshes with himself. He's a self-mesher. And boy, are those good recordings. And he's awfully talented, and I really look forward to everything that he does. I mean, he also did some Sibelius incidental music and other things for Lynn. Never made a bad record that I can tell. I mean, it's not like there are tons of them. He started out recording as a violinist for RCA and also did beautiful, beautiful work there. So he's a guy to watch. I mean, I don't know where he's going to pop up next or what his career trajectory is, but keep your eye out. Hopefully he's out there somewhere waiting to, amaze us with new things. And last but not least, of course, who could forget Mstislav Rostropovich? Now, there's another guy who was just an all-around musician of extraordinary capability. I mean, he was probably the world's greatest cellist ever. He's certainly up there. And when he became a conductor, it took him a little while to learn the trade. He started out doing like those Tchaikovsky symphonies are kind of thick and heavy and gloopy with the London fill. But, so many budding conductors, cut their teeth, in London for some reason where nobody cares if they're slightly amateurish, I guess. I don't know. It's just throwing that out there, just saying. But he later got himself together and he really focused on the music that he knew and loved. Shostakovich and Prokofiev, and then the composers who he knew and who worked with him and who wrote music for him. But he could do a lot more. I saw him do a dynamite Mahler Second Symphony. It was my college graduation. It was in 1983 at the Kennedy Center. And, at the time I was running WJHU, the radio station at Johns Hopkins University. I was director of classical programming. And so when I was a senior, and so I was able to get, because I did reviews of concerts, I was able to get critics promotional tickets to see various things. And at the Kennedy Center, I was in touch with the National Symphony Orchestra, and Rostropovich was the conductor, and he was absolutely wonderful in a lot of things that I saw there. And at my graduation, it was the day of my graduation, they were doing a series of Mahler twos. And so I was there, and my brother was there, and it was very interesting actually because my cousins who were of my age too were also graduating. One of them was also graduating up at Colgate University in upstate New York, and my grandmother, my father's mother, who was an amazing grandma, she was terrific. She was going to that graduation, and so she and my brother were at my graduation in Baltimore. And they were driving up to upstate New York like the next day. And we were all going to be together. My parents went back to Connecticut and, we all graduated. It was lots of fun. And we had nothing to do that one night. So I called up the Kennedy Center and I got tickets to the Mahler 2 that Rostropovich was doing. And we got seats in the president's box because whatever president was never showed up. There's a president's box in the Kennedy Center. It's like the Queen's box or whatever. It's usually vacant. And it was vacant, so they gave me those tickets, which are right smack dab in the middle of like the first balcony boxes. And we went and had dinner at the Watergate, which was really rather cool, the Watergate hotel complex. There's a restaurant down there. So we drove into D.C. and parked, and me and my brother and my grandmother saw Rostropovich do Mahler 2, and it was absolutely fabulous. And then they drove up to Colgate, and I packed up my crap and went home the next day. It was a very memorable time. But Rostropovich was just, incredible musician and a great pianist. I mean, he accompanied his wife at the piano. He played, he was, how he had time for all of it, I have no idea. He was also a very funny guy. He really was. We met at the, Classical Awards, where he and his wife, Galina Vishnevskaya, got Lifetime Achievement Awards. And he's sitting there telling dirty jokes, and she's there talking about, sending politicians to prison. I mean, they were quite a couple, let me tell you. But he was a splendid guy. And I remember it was really very touching because we gave them both Lifetime Achievement Awards. And when he came up to receive his, he said to me, "I really appreciate you doing this for Vishnevskaya because she deserves the honor." And, she gave up her career to follow him into the West. And then they were stripped of their citizenship. And they, really, they had quite the amazing lives. Both of them did. And so Rostropovich, who was just, got to be on any list of serious conductors / cellists / instrumentalists, whatever they are. And there you have it. 18 names. Really, really cool artists of great versatility and range. And oh God, there are just so many of these people, aren't there? Isn't it amazing? I mean, it's all documented on recordings. I mean, that's why we have this and we talk about it. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.